All right, guys, as we mentioned, 200 times in the first segment, we're 10 days away from the NHL trade deadline. And, all we kind of see a lot of times is the final deal, but there's so many working parts and moving parts and very, very busy people. We know GMs are busy, their staff busy, scouts are busy, but I want to know how busy a player agent is, because they are in there as well. And you know what? No better time than now to find out. Ben Hankinson, player agent, joining us on the Athletic Hockey Show. Thanks for doing this, Ben. How are you?
I'm doing fabulous. Thanks for having me, you guys.
So I assume free agency is probably your busiest time of the year. The draft has got to be up there as well. But these 2 weeks now leading up to trade deadline day, just how much time of the 24 hours in a day are you spending on your phone?
That's a great question. I'd say definitely most of the time. I don't know what I've done with my days up until this point. It's crazy because it seems like it's dedicated completely to the few guys that are on the board that could potentially get traded. And at the end of the day, it's tough to track like what I've accomplished, because it's like I don't feel like it's much. But at the end of the day, I've talked to maybe 6 or 7, 8, GMs during that day too. And that's actually the hidden gem in all this. I forget, that my business is about, having relationships and communicating with hockey people and obviously my clients. But it's a great time of year to remind me that talking to these GMs is pretty, I hate to say it, but a fun part of my job too.
So Ben, let's sort of not bury the lead. Yesterday we get word that Luke Schenn's been sent back to Vancouver and for trade related reasons. When did you get word from Patrick Allvin or Jim Rutherford or Luke that this was going to happen? And where's the latest on this in terms of potential imminency that he might be traded?
So yesterday. Actually, it was the night before Luke Schenn traveled with the team from Vancouver, a long flight to Nashville. And he had his ex-teammate, who's a client of mine, Ryan McDonough, marinating on his Traeger grill some tomahawk steaks. So those guys, I actually started a group text with them because they're old teammates and they were cooking a steak and they were eating. And so he goes there, has dinner, and the next morning, I find out that he's not in the top 2 pairings or not on the board for the game that night. So I call Patrick, the GM, and he says, no, we're protecting him because we have this or that or the other thing going on. And you got to remember, he's probably not telling me everything, but I'm helping him behind the scenes. So I want to know what's going on too, because I'm out there like a little shepherd in the field, whether it's, herding everything and kind of stirring it up for him at the same time, sort of working together. Obviously I don't want to overplay my part in this, but, so I know what's going on as well, but, then he wanted to be safe. He wanted to be, as you can see with some other guys, Chikrin and some other guys around the league, and it's no fun. Luke wants to play. So he wants to play last night. He wants to play tomorrow. And they told him he's not going to play. And his wife is extremely pregnant, due any day with their third. So they flew him home. So he flew to Nashville, had a steak dinner with Ryan McDonough, and then flew home. And now the team is in St. Louis. So I just found out yesterday morning. Luke didn't really even know when I called him. I talked to Patrick, and he went and talked to Tocchet. And, it's just a decision that once everyone finds out that Luke isn't playing, then word spreads fast. And then my phone blows up because everyone thinks there's a deal already in place, which there isn't. But it's getting closer, obviously, with the, like you guys said, with the trade deadline, 9-10 days away. It's part of the precaution that they make. So it's not done yet, but hopefully inching that way.
And you kind of answered it a little bit, but I'd like to go a little deeper into it. We talked about it earlier. It's such a trend that players are getting held out. This is nothing new, but longer than usual. There are players that haven't played in weeks. And you mentioned Luke wants to play. Do you think that there's a concern amongst players that anyone who can possibly be traded is now not playing for a considerable amount of time going into the deadline?
Yeah, a little bit. I don't like it, to be honest, either. I understand it and I respect it. And it takes one injury and it could blow a trade, obviously. But yeah, I mean, he understands it too. And he is home. If he's not going to play, then what's the point of being on the road and And he's practicing with his teammates, I guess, but not really, because they're not practicing. They get in after a game last night. So he's just actually probably doing more. Like Luke said, I'll skate back in Vancouver, and the teams will have a morning skate tomorrow in St. Louis. And that's, not much of a skate, but it's no fun for him. Like he does understand it, but he wants to play games. He wants to be ready, because if and when he gets traded, it's better if he's playing and his timing is down, and he plays a physical game. He doesn't play 25 minutes a night. He'll play, 18 minutes a night or whatever it is, but he's always hitting, and he's got to have his timing and his feel and his decision-making down too. So, he's creeping up to 1,000 games, and don't think players don't look at that either. Like, that's a huge milestone for a player to get 1,000 games. He's in the low 900s right now. He leads the NHL in hits. So I know he's tracking that as well. He doesn't say it, so it's not like he's selfish about his own stats or anything, but these guys, they have little goals to accomplish big goals.
They do. And that big goal is, big extension a lot of times with a UFA, and sitting out's not helping their stats in any way, shape, or form. But Ben, I wanted to ask you about no movement clauses and modified no movement clauses, because especially at this time of year, we hear it all the time. Patrick Kane's a perfect example of, he's got to provide us with the teams. Walk us through that process. When a GM says, he calls you and says, Ben, we want to move this player, but he's got a no movement clause. Walk me through the process of not only talking to the GM, but how you and the player kind of break down, say it's 5 teams, 10 teams, whatever it may be. Is that a tough process?
Yes, it is, because you kind of can start bridging the business versus human element of it. And I talked to Michael about this with Ryan McDonough, and that's a perfect segue into kind of the understanding the 101 of the hockey no move or no trades, because Ryan McDonough had a no trade, and there's also a no move, and then there's a modified no trade. But a no move means you can't go on waivers either. And you think, well, what does that have to do with it? And it really shouldn't, because you're talking about an NHL player that obviously someone wants, so they would never go on waivers, right? But Ryan McDonough last year in the summer, after they made a run and won a couple cups, the Tampa Bay GM, Julian Breesbaugh, came to Ryan and us and said, we got to move him. But he had a full, no trade, not a no move, so a no trade. And so we had a little bit of control working with him where he could go. But at the end of it, he wanted to make a fast move, and he wanted to kind of free up money to sign a couple other players. So he wanted to do it within a day or two. And all of a sudden he threatened to put him on waivers, meaning someone else could pick him up for nothing. And that's basically what happened, because he's older now, and he's got a few more years on his contract. And he's still a huge part of any team, the Nashville Predators now. But there's a couple of years when he gets into his mid-30s that teams, aren't as excited about his contract probably. And I still think he'll bring value, but that's a whole other point. So the no trade turned into a threat. Well, we'll put him on waivers. And then potentially for Ryan, that's not that exciting, because now you go to the worst team in the league. And probably a veteran that's won cups doesn't want to play for the worst team in the league. So he all of a sudden turned that into a little bit of leverage for him, where we ended up working out a trade before he went on waivers. So those no trade, no moves, usually, a lot of times it's a modified no trade where there's maybe 8 teams, maybe 4 teams, maybe 16 teams. And I probably have 7 or 8 guys that have those modified no trades, and you send a list to the GM on a certain date. And usually it's around free agency, because there's also a lot of trades. You said the busy times are trade deadline, free agency, the draft. And at the draft, there's generally trades because there's picks involved, and that's when everyone's together. And then right before free agency is a great time for trades. So that's when the no trade lists are due. So you turn it in and you go through, the teams. And, depending on, sometimes you put it together blocking certain teams too. Like a lot of times, North American players, and I hate to say this, will put Canadian cities on there. And it's usually the same teams, but then always the lowly, like Arizona Coyotes. And if a lot of times, those teams aren't on the no trade because, like they're not a target for like a Kane, he's not getting traded to Arizona, because he's a rental and they're obviously out of the playoffs. So that's a long long-winded answer, but they are protection for the players. But at the same time, if the team goes to the fans and it gets out that they want to trade him and the team rejects the trade, that puts a lot of pressure on that player as well, because they don't want to disappoint, so to say, the fan base, and they feel like, okay, you're blocking our organization from bettering ourselves too. So it's a tricky situation.
And, one player I've learned since, one team that I've learned since that you basically were working behind the scenes with to try to get Ryan McDonough to was Minnesota, and Bill Guerin couldn't make it work, Ben. And that brings me to another one of your clients. I mean, I think, we've all seen all the rumors about Brock Boeser and the potential that he could be traded. He has 2 years left at 6.65. I think that Boeser, you know as well as I do what kind of relationship I have with him. He's a special kid with coming from a special family, and I think he would love to come back here with Minnesota. I think the Wild love him, but right now their cap situation kind of inhibits that ability. Where do you see that going, and do you think there's ever that point that we could see Brock Boeser in a Minnesota Wild uniform?
Yeah, that's a great analogy, and it is the truth with his contract. They have cap room this year. It's not the problem. The problem is the following 2 years. And Brock has 2 more years on his contract. So they're trying to move some things around potentially. And more importantly, they're maybe, are they on the inside? They obviously had a big win last night. And there's 82 games. You don't think one win would be so important. But where are they sitting? Does Billy want to add? Or could he, be potentially a seller? But where does Brock Boeser fit in? I think he fits in perfectly, on a top 6 scoring wing, probably playing with Boldy. But, there's other pieces in play. There's rumors that, Greenway could be going. Obviously, the Dumba rumors, and Addison's been scratched a little bit too. So there's a ton of play with Billy. And even going back to Ryan McDonough, he's always trying to figure out, how to fit guys in. Ryan McDonough didn't fit. Billy tried. He tried, and he would have had to move, probably a defenseman. He definitely didn't want to move to make room for Ryan McDonough. Ryan McDonough is a big shot blocking, plays heavy, defenseman that plays a lot of minutes that I think would have worked perfectly with the Minnesota Wild. If he was right-handed, it'd even be more perfect. But so he's always looking at every scenario to get, whether it's a center or a winger or Brock Boeser specifically. He's 25 years old. He can score. He's not scoring at a great rate this year. He's putting up a lot of points. But I think he'd be a great fit. There'd have to be a lot of salary retained by Vancouver, and I don't think that's something they're too excited to do because they just signed Brock Boeser, and Billy would have to have them eat, a big chunk of that 6.65 to fit him in next year and the year after, because that's when the cap gets really tight for the Wild.
And you mentioned you're talking to a lot of people, you're talking to GMs, you're talking to your clients. I'm curious, I was talking to a few of the Golden Knights players here in Vegas about the trade deadline and all the stuff they hear and all the rumors about what trades. I'm curious, how different of a communication style do you have with certain players? Like, are there certain guys who want to hear everything? Hey, anything you hear about where I could be moved, I want to know. And then there are some guys that are like, I want nothing to do with it. Tell me when the trade is done.
Right. Yeah, that's a great example. Dustin Byfuglien was that way with his contract. He just said, tell me when it's done. The years, the dollars, everything. You just tell me. It's like we have Luke Schenn, whose wife is pregnant. That's a whole different dynamic. What happens when he's traded and his wife can't travel technically? Does he get traded to Calgary? Does he get traded to Boston or wherever in between? And that's a lot of logistics. Does he move away from home and leave the kids? But the question is that they want to know these players. Okay, if Luke Schenn gets traded, is there a contract, added to that? Is he a rental, or does he get traded and signed? So we got to be ready, and communication has to be strong with Luke, like what his value could be if he resigns, or does he move everything and potentially re-sign with Vancouver and come back? So there's moving trucks involved, and there's a lot of logistics with potentially private flights for a wife that's pregnant, that she probably has a few days still to travel. And we tried to push that to happen sooner. And I think Vancouver wanted to make a decision with Luke sooner. So we were communicating a lot on that, but they just couldn't pull it together because the market, is what dictates it. And, they're running a business too. So, I think Luke, I talked to a few times a day. And Brock, I was, texting with him after the game last night. And I was telling him certain things that he should do because certain teams are watching, need him in a certain role. So it's kind of funny in that regard, kind of poking him a little bit with make sure you do this or do that because this guy's watching.
That's what I love about Hank, by the way. I mean, like, he gives tough love to his clients. I mean, man, there were a couple times where you had it out with guys like Bukestad here in Minnesota. Like, you need to play this way if you want to prolong your career.
Yeah, that's the fun and the hard part is I played, so I knew what I never did to get to this level. So I can tell these guys, hey, don't watch me, just listen to me. I'll tell you. But yeah, like Brock will say, I feel like I'm playing the best hockey, and Brock Boeser, and considering the situation they're in, who he's playing with, the culture in Vancouver isn't great right now. They're losing players left and right. Now Luke's out of the lineup. So, but it's results. Like, Brock, you're paid to score. You got to go score. And he's like, but I'm playing great. And you can't control the puck going to the net, but you sure can control, shooting the puck and digging. And what's your B game? If you're not scoring, you better be doing something else. And that's where, he's got to, battle and compete and be a on a playoff team. Your role is going to be a little different. If you win a cup, you're not going to be, the first guy in the half wall, maybe on the power play. You're going to be, maybe sitting on the bench even, and he's a power play guy. And yeah, there's a lot of layers to it, but Michael, to your point, yes, it's like parenting, right? Sometimes you got to give them a little kick in the ass. And other times you got to hug them and tell them, even though they know you're lying to them, how good they're playing.
Ben, how much is the role, publicly at least, of the agent changed? Because, I remember growing up, I couldn't tell you every player's agent. And I know I'm in the media now, so it's a little different. But, the first segment we talked about, Alan Walsh sends out a tweet about Calgary, everything goes nuts. You're talking to us on the show now. The role of the agent seems to be so much more public now. And I know it's your job to pump the tires of your players, but is there a line that you're careful not to cross where it looks as though you're the celebrity and the player isn't? Or is it just a matter of, this is now part of my job, I've got to put my player on a pedestal?
Yeah, and it kind of depends on your client and what his personality is. I think a lot of times, like, Alan Walsh sends out that tweet and it's approved, or there's been a lot of conversations coming from the player. And I'm not saying, with Alan that the player always knows, but I think it's something that's done together to figure out, how to better the situation. And unfortunately, sometimes it is to blow it up. But, everyone has a different personality and style. And I'm more kind of behind the scenes in that regard. I hate, and some people probably enjoy it, but I hate, kind of using social media to promote myself, or even not so much the players. Like, obviously I want to promote the players, but that's not their DNA always, these hockey players. Like, they're not, they don't have huge social media accounts like other sports. So they're not promoting their own highlights and everything else. But yeah, it is my job to get a message out there. And sometimes it is like, cause I do tweet a lot about my guys, and it's good things. It's normally not much deeper than, scoring a goal and their stats and a few other things. But yeah, most of the guys, I think they obviously, they know someone's got to be pushing them behind their back. They don't always love it. My guys wouldn't like it if I tweeted something like that if I tweeted something on the team or the coach. Like, I generally really haven't done it. I've done it once. I did it with Jake Gardiner in Toronto in the craziest market. And it was front page on the next day. There was a picture of Jake Gardiner on chains on the cross, and it was headlines, "Free Jake Gardiner," because I had sent a tweet, "Free Jake Gardiner," and it actually, I don't want to say it worked, but it did. He got called up and he played, but it blew up huge, and I think that was the play at the time, but I wouldn't do that again.
Ben, you mentioned Big Buff before. Not many people quit the NHL and leave $6 million or so on the table, but this guy did. Can you kind of walk everybody through how that all came about, him essentially leaving the sport? And were you shocked last week when you saw him on the ice at Andrew Ladd's charity thing?
Yes, I was shocked when I saw him on the ice because everyone changes over time as they get older. He'll look back and have like fond memories of his career. And now I see already he's on the ice much sooner than I thought he'd be. He told me he'd really never skate again unless it's with his kids. But he left. You said 6. I say 14 million.
Mm-hmm.
He had like 8 and 6, and that was a crazy decision because his ankle was bothering him from playing 100 games the year before. And Buff is a unique hockey player, and the modern day athletes now go. They rarely go a couple days without skating. Buff ended the season in Winnipeg the year before with an ankle that was bothering him, and it was a terrible ending, I think, to the Blues. And then he left and he puts his skates, like who knows where he puts them, but they disappear for months. And then his ankle was bothering him at the time. And I thought that it was going to be fine. He thought it was going to be fine at the start of the season. So he didn't really pay much attention. He came back in the beauty league and started skating, and his ankle was bothering him. And so we dealt with the Jets on it, and they said, well, how was it all summer? And Buff said, well, it's fine, because all he did was basically fish on it and train, but he wasn't skating. So he goes into training camp and tells me he can't play. And that was the beginning of 3 seasons ago, I believe. And he's scheduled to make $8 million. And I said, okay, let's take care of this. Let's go see the doctor. Let's go talk to the Jets. He goes, no, I'm done. I don't want to play anymore. I can't play with my ankle like this. And I said, well, Buff, we can fix your ankle. And he just said, no. He met with the GM and said, I'm done. I can't play with my ankle like this. And then so it gets tricky where, okay, if this is a hockey injury, which it certainly is, let's get this fixed. And, you'll, in my, interest too, is you'll get paid like this. You got hurt, like you're still due, and you can come back from this and make your $8 million this year, $6 million. And it was 8 the last year, whatever it was, but it was a $6 and $8 million season ahead, 2 of them. And so anyway, Buff had the surgery, rehabbed, and then said, I don't want to play. And he just quit. So he could have fought that and ended up getting paid. But Buff is a unique character, and it's not, it's easy to say it's not about the money, but it was about his lifestyle and just saying, I've had enough. I wasn't having fun anymore. I wasn't at the rink skating with the guys. And it was a crazy decision that Buff slept well at night and still does, walking away from that. And he's just a simple guy. He's a fisherman and hunts and spends time, with people in small groups, and he just disappears. And he's been nothing but happy, and it's crazy to see him on the ice. I'd love to see him, in front of fans, of course.
Buff's about as unique as they come, but I feel like there are a lot of unique guys, and I'm curious how like communitory are there GMs reaching out to you to see how a player might fit on their team? If they're thinking about trading for him, like how many calls are you getting of GMs just asking, we know what this guy's like on the ice, what kind of player is this, or is that something that they're talking about the other GMs with?
Yeah, and that's a great question, and it's actually interesting because you can't talk to a team about another player. It's tampering, right. And I do have permission from, specifically if we're talking about Boeser or Schenn. I don't have permission. I don't want to say, because there's all kinds of reports out there whether I have permission to talk to teams or not. But I did admit that I'm trying to help Vancouver and help my client too find a good spot. But yes, and that's where I played, and I think it's an advantage to understanding, where a guy fits in a room, where he fits on the ice and the lineup. When it's going well, when it's not going well. I mentioned what's his B game. I mean, does he kill penalties? Like Nick Bukestad's another guy that you mentioned, Michael, and he could get traded. He was with the Wild, and he was close to re-signing with the Wild, but his role was very diminished, and he didn't play as much as Nick, felt he could, and he knew there was more there, and he went to Arizona to get an opportunity to play a lot more. And it's been a great season. He has 13 goals. I know he leads their team in penalty killing, and I think he's probably 4th in ice time among forwards. And he plays in overtime. He plays in all situations. Not necessarily a power play guy, but now he could get traded. He's a 6'6" plus centerman that's right shot, and he can skate, and he can play wing as well. So I do, find out from teams what they're looking for, what they need. And Luke Schenn hasn't got traded because there's a lot of other top D out there that will probably get moved, before Luke, gets moved. So there might be 6 guys in looking at, say, Chikrin, and only one team is going to get them. And the other 5, will go for maybe the next guy. There's a big D in Columbus, a Russian defenseman. That's a top guy out there too. And there's probably 2 or 3 other guys that teams look at. And then if they don't get what they want, they look at Luke Schenn, but they also kick tires with me too, and maybe act like they're more interested they are to have a plan B and C and D in order. So I'm always talking to teams about, where they are, where they fit in. And then teams like the Wild, Washington, other teams that you think are going to be in it, trying to acquire players to get them over the hump, might lose a couple games, Calgary, and then, maybe they're out, and there's now all of a sudden, instead of trading 4 players, they're trading players. So, it's always changing, but I always try to have my finger on the pulse to talk to teams and see where it could be a good fit. Most importantly for my guys going forward, this year and down the road.
Hank, I am around you a lot, at Octagon camps and to beauty leagues. So I kind of always see the behind the scenes of what it's like to be an agent. And, when you go to sites like Puckpedia and things like that, we know you have almost 300-400 million of long-term contracts out there in the NHL, but we never see the sort of unglamorous side of being an agent, the amount of, clients that you have that you invest a ton of time and money in, fly over to Europe, all that type of stuff. It isn't expensive. We all always say, oh, you got a, $100,000 commission there or 150 there, but there's a lot of money that agents spend to do it. Can you kind of address about just what that is like and what it takes to recruit guys, the amount of money that you invest into certain players that maybe never see the light of day?
And it's a sports world. It's kind of like your world too, you guys. You're not 9 to 5. Like at night, you can't just turn off your phone and start watching Netflix. That's when things happen. That's when, players get bought out or there's UFA signings or whatever it is. Same as your jobs. You're always, one buzz on your phone away from something big happening. And then you have to write a story on it and be an expert breaking it down. So it's the same with me. It's a 9 to 5 job during the day, but then I have a night shift too, where I'm grinding. And it's not just covering NHL players. Like to get to the NHL, you have to play, mites, peewees. I start watching them in Bantams, believe it or not. And I haven't because I've been lucky. I've been picking up, clients that are in the NHL when they're a little older. So I haven't had to recruit as hard, but there's like 2008s now, which are they're like, 14 years old, turning 15 this year. I have to know the best 2008s, in Minnesota and around the world. And those guys have advisors that help navigate them through these paths. So now you're talking navigating through what? Do they play high school? Do they go play junior? Do they go up to Canada and play junior? Do they go to prep schools? So I'm dealing with coaches now and, really scouts, college scouts, because colleges are recruiting these players. And, so I have to deal with everyone from the 2007s to the, 1980 born players. So you have to grind and know, what is happening with each one of the guys you're tracking, which might be 100 kids. Even if I have, say, 25 NHL guys, there's another, say, 75 players that I'm tracking daily. And ask my wife how glamorous it is, because it's nonstop, going from high school games to junior games to obviously the best is the pros with the AHL and the NHL. And then I was over in Sweden, watching players over there. So it's always trying to find, I'm only as good of an agent as my players are, obviously. I got to grind and get them, the market value and better contracts. But the better players you find, it's like coaching. The easier it is to win games, or the easier it is to get them contracts. But, there's a lot. It used to be when I played, agents negotiated contracts. Now you have to be a salesman before you're an agent. So I'm 100% on commission. So my paychecks depend on what my players make. And if you're talking to a 2007, or 8, they don't get paid until they're, probably they don't make money where we would actually make money on until they're 25 years old. And, that's a long time. So in between there, you're doing everything from being a strength coach to a nutritionalist to a counselor, psychologist, and then eventually, you the guy's getting some trouble maybe where you're facilitating between, a lawyer, a estate planner, a tax planner. You're dealing with the wife now, so you're and first you're dealing with the parents, then the player, then the wife, And then, hopefully representing the kids, which happens. I bet you I have, I don't know, 5 or 6 or 7 of my clients' kids that I represent now. So you're kind of doing a little bit of everything along the way, but it's the fun job. I absolutely love it, and I wouldn't do anything else. And it does not feel like work to me, but it's constant. A lot of hand holding and a lot of free advice along the way.
By the way, is that Patrick Alvin that keeps calling you or no?
Yes.
Yeah, trying to get a scoop. All Russo's always trying to get a scoop. Ben, given the fact that you have like 25 jobs that you just listed, I'm even more grateful that you could carve some time out to come talk to us. Thanks so much for doing this. Enjoy the next 10 days because, as you said, it's probably going to be nuts. And keep in touch. We'll talk to you later on in the season.
Thanks, you guys. It's been a lot of fun. Appreciate it.